You're not going to have like one career and expect this to be the path. Those days are long gone. We tamp down that expressive side. We tamp down that creative side, and we tamp down the shadow side. So we need to allow that to come out and express once again. I love helping people. That's my foundation. I think that's one of the reasons I went in the Marine Corps as a protector, the LAPD.
All right, welcome to the Evolving Potential Podcast. I am super excited to have here with me Bob Choat, the Grand Master of Transformation. He is a Marine Corps veteran. He was a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, so I hate saying he was a Marine. But former LAPD officer, 5th degree, black belt in Kenpo, Jeet Kune Do instructor. He has a PhD in psychology. He's a certified master trainer in NLP. He's an executive and peak performance coach, a certified hypnotherapist, as well as a former renowned stage hypnotist called Bobby Spade. So this is very interesting. We'll have to talk about that. I like to consider all of this being what's called a polymath, someone who's incredibly gifted in multiple fields, has studied in multiple different fields, and moved into the expertise field in at least one. And so he is also the creative force behind the School of Transformation podcast. He has his own podcast. He's an accomplished author of a book called Mind Your Own Fitness, as well as his new book that's coming soon, Develop the Champion Within. He has also co-authored a book called Unleashing Firepower, The Masters of Business Excellence. He's also started the Integrated Mind Institute and has been widely recognized in many articles for his expertise in peak performance. So I am happy, grateful, excited for Bob to be here with me, and we'll just kind of chat and see what sort of value we can provide. Love first for you to talk about how you got involved in this world of transformation after transitioning out of a life of being a Marine and being a LAPD officer.
Yeah, I think even before the Marines, it's always about transformation. So like with me, early on, I had a major stutter, and I was very anxious and under a lot of stress. I had a father that was very abusive and everything, and I was diagnosed. So going back in clinical diagnosis, especially in the area of psychology, they had like these major labels, and one of the labels that they had based on your IQ score, because I took an IQ score at age 5, and it was very low. It was at 70. And that was the cutoff point for a diagnostic label. I like to call label, but it wasn't a label back then, of moron. And there was others as well.
Jeez.
Yeah. But that was an actual diagnostic, what was done, and I forget the gentleman's name who came up with it, a psychologist back in the early 20th century. And so back in those days, we still had that. And it wasn't changed till later on that they got rid of those. I believe that was in the early 70s. They finally got rid of it. I had the diagnosis back in the 50s. I was born in 1951. So,
jeez, that's crazy. The technical term was like moron.
Correct.
Yeah. Jeez. Yeah.
So I was introduced, even going like later on, because it was in my file, as a moron. And so that stuck with me in a sense. And my mom recognized it. I'm half Japanese, and my mom recognized that wasn't right. So when I was living in Okinawa, she put me into martial arts. So I lived there for 3 years and studied Goju and everything like that. And that was my early transformation to have that shift. And then that helped me quite a bit, including in school and so forth. And then by the time I got to junior high, I was like excelling in various subjects. Like in math, for example, I was in 7th grade. I was already doing algebra, and then geometry in 8th grade, and then going further on, all the way to calculus in 10th grade, and also doing physics and everything else early on. So that whole nerd thing came on top of that, doing sports and involved in all kinds of other areas. Even in the ninth grade, I still stuttered, but also performed with two other friends in a talent show. So singing and dancing and all that kind of stuff, we ended up winning. And so,
Uh,
yeah. So transformation wasn't just later on. It just was an ongoing thing. I
so
graduated early.
do you
Go.
feel like, in your personal opinion, sorry to cut you off, do you feel like, in your personal opinion, that a lot of the physical training stuff you did helped with your stuttering, helped with, getting your thoughts out? Or is that something that you didn't notice until later, that you're kind of were able to overcome the stuttering?
Yeah, I still stuttered. I think it helped quite a bit, especially a lot of the stuff in neuroscience. We know that physical training helps with the brain, in particular like learning and memory and all those kind of things. I think being able to sync up the brain, I learned that much later in terms of the off sync, especially with stuttering and everything like that. And
Yeah.
if you have anxiety and stress, it creates that the sync between our verbal and what we want to say and expressing it is just out of kilter. And so I learned that, and especially connecting with my body, doing the martial arts and then other sports and everything else, that helped quite a bit. More than I think physical fitness is important for the brain growth, but also in learning, being able to sync up our bodies and doing it a certain way. Like for example, in a martial arts, when I was doing katas and having that sync, that helped quite a bit. And studying all the different martial arts and being able to move through different martial arts. And then again, my nerd self, I would study and all that kind of stuff. How does this thing work? How does this thing work? I look at the physics and physiology and I would break it down. Eventually, going back to the stuttering part, I realized that I can also shift that nervousness that I would have, especially getting into public speaking. So I recognized that, and I studied that the same feeling in our body that we have a fear of production, everything like that, that same feeling in our body is the same feeling of excitement.
Mm.
And so I just shifted those words. I understood that, just like doing shifting in the martial arts. And so once I understood that, everything shifted in terms of public speaking. I was able to take something that was scary to me, public speaking, to something that excited me, and I can get out there now. And now it's something I get to do, not something I fear to do.
That's really powerful. So I've actually shared that with someone as well. So it's like the idea that there is some sort of sensation that we experience, and those sensations equal like a feeling. And that feeling might be like a upset stomach or tingling or heart rate increasing and stuff. And then we create a story for that sensation. So it's like, okay, well, this sensation means I'm nervous. I have so much anxiety. Oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. And so we can switch that to that story to being excited. And I've actually shared that with a coworker one time who was doing a job interview for some like dream job she wanted. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm just so nervous. I have so much anxiety. And I was like, well, aren't you like excited about the opportunity? Aren't you excited that you could potentially get this job? She's like, well, yeah. And I was like, do you know that excitement and anxiety feel the same in the body? They have the same physiological response. And she was like, no way. And then like ended up telling me a week later that like it just completely changed her drive to the interview, completely changed her experience at the interview with that one little shift. So that's a powerful one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we can look at anything that happens within our body and we can interpret a number of different ways. And a lot of the research in psychology has been done in the Western world. But when we look at, like, for example, in the Asian culture, they have a different interpretation of what's happening within our body. Even facial expressions are much different. So we have all these kind of different interpretations that we have to learn to understand, going through all the emotions and understanding that emotions are simply our interpretation of physiological things that are happening with our own body. It's nothing else. People think that emotions come before feelings. No, your feelings come, and then you have an interpretation called an emotion, and then we have a thought that interprets that as well. So it starts with feelings to emotions to thoughts.
Yeah, see, and that's it. Gosh, that's exactly what I am actually. I'm getting my master's in sociology right now to study primarily that, to study the factors of how our social group, how our cultural conditioning teaches us what sort of experiences we're having and what those mean. And so those experiences could equal anxiety, or those
Mm-hmm.
experiences could just equal the normal human experience as the ebb and flow of normal emotion and
Correct.
and, and
Correct.
sadness and grief and all those things that are very normal to be thinking about. Or maybe you are focusing too much on thinking about the future and blah blah blah. And like that doesn't mean you have anxiety as an anxiety disorder. And so I always struggle to want to go there with people because it's like a touchy subject. It's like, okay, there are people that have it a little bit more intensely. There are people that experience these things and it's very real to them, and I get it. But at the same time, it's like if you were raised in a culture that never taught you the word anxiety, then you wouldn't have anxiety. It would be more of just a human experience that you could learn to interpret in a way that's positive.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I think. In fact, I read an article recently, and the article talked about how a lot in today's younger generation, they see a lot of therapists and all this kind of stuff. Go see a therapist, and it turns out that that's led to a lot of emotional disorders. And I think a lot of therapists inadvertently has created labels onto these people. So this is what you're going through. So now you're this, and so you have this disorder. And it's the same thing like uh, going back to the 80s and early 90s where we heard about these kids like McMark in school and things like that where they were supposedly molested by the schools and all these things, but those were implanted memories. So it's the same thing like that. I think a lot of therapists, they don't know what they don't know, so they create these labels, these interpretations of what's happening within these people's bodies, and then all of a sudden they're this. And I have told a lot of therapists and other people in the mental health field, don't try to interpret like what's going through these people as this because you don't know yet. Now you're creating something that didn't exist before.
Yeah, yeah. It honestly creates there's a whole social problem that I see there, and Daniel Smachtenberger, like a social philosopher, talks a lot about this as well, where it's like there's this need that we have for certainty, and there's need we have
Correct.
for answers and the quick fix, and so there is a pressure on the reverse end, of not just the therapist to feel the need to label, but for that person to be wanting a label, for wanting, oh, if I know what it is, then I can start working on fixing it. You know what I mean? And so they're going to the doctor, they're going to the therapist, looking for a label, thinking that that will make them better, when in reality, it generally turns into a lifelong condition at that point.
Correct. I'm glad you brought up certainty versus uncertainty. And you're absolutely right, is that people, and that's human nature. We create things that we want things to be a certain way. And the truth is things change. Things change all the time. I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot of different changes through the many decades and a lot of the stuff was not even predicted to happen. I mean, look at like the last year and a half when ChatGPT came out. Now there's been a lot of new businesses created using using the API from OpenAI to create all this kind of stuff. And and you probably saw OpenAI Sora.
No, I can't say I have. No, tell me.
So Sora is a text to video uh, creation. You just do the prompt, and it'll create amazing high resolution videos. And
What?
and there's already been short movies made with Sora, and so it's not out for the general public yet.
How do you spell this?
Sora.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna look that up. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a whole shift, and now OpenAI's come out with a voice. So it'll take 15 seconds of your own voice, and it'll analyze it, and then you'll type in uh, like a sentence or something like that, and it'll perfectly emulate your own voice.
Oh man.
Sounds exactly the same
Can send someone a voicemail through text and
through text.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
yeah.
crazy.
So things are shifting in terms of that we would not have known before, and imagine what it's going to do to the future. Now, that's only when I said imagine. That's all we can do is imagine. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know tomorrow what's going to happen, or even an hour from now. But we can imagine something that is going to shift. It may or may not happen, and that's a great thing about our imaginations. We can try to predict, but all predictions that we have, and you probably heard this term, is basically done on predictive coding. So basically, what that means is that everything, all our decisions, and everything we try to even imagine into the future, even like what I'm saying right now, is based on past experiences and past knowledge. Everything. It's not based on current. It's based on something I read an hour ago, 2 days ago, a year ago, 20 years ago. But it's all that accumulation and and everything I've studied and people I've been around and experienced and everything like that. That's what I'm making decisions. That's what I'm saying, even right at this moment, is all based on the past. And so trying to predict the future, we don't know. And in chaos theory, things are chaotic. And you mentioned earlier about certainty versus uncertainty. It's always uncertainty. You can't be certain about anything.
Yeah, no, and that's a big part of the podcast as well, is understanding the need for adaptation in this new world and resilience, mental toughness and flexibility,
Correct.
because yeah, because everything is shifting so quickly, and I truly don't think that people let themselves think enough about the consequences, and the change that's coming, because it is imaginative, and we can only really imagine based on the past, as you're saying. So it's like the past has generally changed kind of slow, slowish, if you will, for our own compared to this, I would say, because slow compared to back in the past, no, we've progressed so fast, but compared to how like what Moore's law, talks about, um, how fast we're continually increasing the pace at which we're progressing, and people cannot predict the rate that we're going to progress at, and they cannot predict the rate that they're going to need to change at, that they're going to need to adapt and move into a new field of work, um,
Correct.
learn something new, change your skills. Like it's coming, and so I think that this, podcast ideally can serve as a place where people can understand how to kind of like shift and learn more and be more excited about life and be more curious and be more like a polymath, so there is some diversity there amongst their skills, so that they're able to shift into new fields fairly seamlessly without too much life stress.
Correct. I can recall years ago when key punch operators were like the big thing, and they died overnight. When people focused only on that one skill set, uh, when they lost that, when that whole field just died out, uh, they had nowhere else to go. And you're absolutely right. We need to have a diversity of experiences, knowledge, learning, skill sets, and so forth. Yes, you can deep dive into uh, one or two skills, become in terms of master that, but it doesn't take long to become an expert in a skill set. So you could become an expert in a few months. It takes years to master something. You can become an expert. And in some cases, some people have done it even within a month. I say that if you're deeply focused and you're only focusing on that one skill set, yes, you probably can do it within a month or 2 months to become an expert, but still, we can learn. And I'm constantly challenging my own beliefs. And a lot of people, especially like in my age or older, or even some younger, it's hard for them to make changes, to learn something new. Luckily for me, I've always embraced like learning new things. and asking myself, is what I know now, is it based on fact for the present? It may have worked for the past. Is it based on for the present? And what do I have to learn now that will help to carry me into the future? And who do I have to talk to? Who do I have to surround myself with? A lot of my new friends are Gen Z, and
Mm.
yeah, and then I have a lot of millennials as well, and I got to know a lot of them because I do parkour. I've been doing it for a lot of years, and
So
so
awesome.
doing that kind of crazy stuff. And yeah, in fact, a lot of the millennials that I was doing parkour with, once they got past 30, they stopped doing it because they said they just got too old to do it. And I'm going
Jeez.
to be
Okay.
73, and I'm going to be 73 in August, and I still feel like the
Agile.
agile, yeah, a younger person. Yeah, I understand that my body is much older than it used to be, but I say challenge yourself anyway. Challenge yourself. Now you're not going to probably be running up buildings and jumping off of them, or vaulting over a wall, or doing any of these other things. But still, you can still challenge yourself at any age. You can still grow at any age. The brain is always changing anyway, whether you like it or not. You can have it change where it stops growing and you start losing what you know, or you can continue to grow and learn. I remember reading about this one guy, I think it was about 3 years ago, where he graduated with his PhD in physics at the age of 89. So he continued to grow. Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah,
Yes, see, that's the kind of stories I love. Even like all the personal development guys that are out there doing their talks and learning and growing and reading and making new connections and going to these conferences at 89. Brian Tracy and Bob Proctor and it's just crazy to see that amount of drive at such an older age to continue to take in more and more information and feel like they're pretty sharp still. It's just
yeah,
not the common paradigm that people want you to believe or that we see too often. We see it in like the blue zones or centenarians. It's like, oh, they're still able to can maintain some sort of cognizance. But I think that there's a lot of people out there doing it, and there's a certain way that they're doing it. And I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, but you're doing it.
yeah. I think we should continue throughout our life. And if you're younger, especially like in your 20s, don't just try to settle on like one career path. Get out there and experience different things, learn, and grow, because that accumulation right there is going to help you into your 30s and 40s and beyond. You're going to be able to see things much differently. But if you get stuck only in one area, one way of thinking, and your parents may have done that, like one career the whole life, you may have seen your grandparents like that as well. Well, things are much different in today's world anyway. You're not going to have like one career and expect this to be the path. Those days are long gone.
Yeah,
And
see, so I would love to talk about that because the identity shifts that go along with that are really hard to deal with. So someone feeling like, well, I've put 2 or 3 years into college and doing this career, and so I need to stick with it because this is what I said. So it's like my reputation resides on it, or it's because what someone wants for me, or it's because it's a good job, and they're really unwilling to shift into a new career because of that fear of judgment, or who am I outside of this thing that I've been working so hard on. Like if I've been working hard to be a doctor and I decide I don't want to be a doctor anymore, it's like, well, all I've ever done is go to medical school. I've spent my life going to medical school. I spent my life trying to be a doctor. This is who I am. If I want to shift out of being a doctor, who am I now?
a lot of people get caught up, whether it's the families or otherwise, that this is a career you should be doing. And a couple of friends of mine. So about about 15 years ago, one of my female friends, when she was 42 at the time, she was a psychiatrist, and she uh, told me that she just doesn't feel it. This is not what she wants to do. And I asked her, what was it that you want to do? And she says, I want to be an actress. That's my thing. That's what I feel resonates with me. So at 42, she uh, decided to give up her practice as a psychiatrist after all the schooling, going through
Wow.
college and medical school and also advanced schools in terms of psychiatry. She gave it all up to become an actress. Back in the 90s, another friend of mine, his name is Barry, and he was a lawyer up in San Francisco, a very top lawyer. He came from a family of attorneys, siblings, parents, grandparents, and that was like what their family did. So he's Jewish, and that was their thing. And at the age of 50, he came to me and said that the same thing as a psychiatrist, it just wasn't what resonated with him. And we sat down and talked, and I asked him, if you could think about something in your past that when you think about it, it brings you joy. And he started thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, and all of a sudden I saw his face just glow. He says, Bob, back when I was in college, I got to be the DJ of our college radio station. And as he talked about it, his body language shifted big time. And he just had that aha moment. 6 months later, he called me and he says, Bob, guess what? And I said, what? He says, I'm now interning at a local radio station here. And then a year later, he got out. I think he was still doing law part time, but he was doing that full time as a radio DJ. And when I saw him, he completely changed. He got rid of his big home and all kind of stuff. That was obvious because you don't make much money as a DJ compared to what his $2 million a year, what he was doing as an attorney.
Yeah.
Yet, prior to that, he was walking like he looked much older than his age. Afterwards, he was walking he looked 20 years younger. He was
Jeez.
happy and he was doing something that he felt like play.
Yeah, see, that's so crazy to me. Like that is what I'm constantly harping on people is like I'll talk to someone, they're like, I'm like, whoa, what do you do outside of work, a coworker or whatever? And they're like telling me, and I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're really interested in. What are they trying to do? What is their mission in life? What are they trying to accomplish? And it's like, oh, I'm going to be an accountant or I'm going to be an electrician. And it's like, that answer doesn't matter at all. And then there's no judgment towards it unless like you don't actually want to do that. You're just doing it because it's a good job. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So if someone's like, oh, I love studying electricity and I always put together parts and my dad's an electrician and I love, like, that's a great story, then that's fine. Then do that. If you love numbers, you love really doing the accounting stuff, then do that. But if it's just because it's a good job, it's like, it hurts my
Correct.
heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And eventually people will go into the 40s and 50s and they have what's called a midlife crisis. And a midlife crisis, yeah, you may have guys going, like getting their sports car and doing all that kind of stuff. The truth is, the midlife crisis is when people discover after all the years of doing a certain career that it really wasn't for them. They get to thinking, is this really what life is all about? Kind of mindset. And I tell people, don't wait for that. You need to go and have the different experience, find what resonates with you early in life. Gain a lot of experiences. Otherwise, you're going to be the person who retires at the end of their life, and then they start doing the stuff, maybe what they really wanted to do or whatever like that, but then it's too late. They can't do all the kind of experiences early on. And I said, do it early. By the time you go through life, you'll be doing what you really want to do or what resonates with you. Don't get caught up about what people say that you should be doing. Now, having said that, you're going to have certain skill sets where there's stuff that you're good at, and utilize that. So other people may recognize what you're good at, and you may not recognize that, and you may poo-poo it. So recognize that, and embrace what you're good at. People have told me, like, Bob, you're good at doing this and this and this in terms of maybe motivation, everything like that, because they see me all the time, everywhere, speaking and helping people out, which I didn't do before. I love helping people. That's my foundation. I think that's one of the reasons I went in the Marine Corps as a protector, the LAPD, and even teaching women's self-defense, doing bodyguard work, and all kinds of different things throughout my life. I like protecting, I like that, but I realized that I can't protect people. Even Superman can't protect every single person, but I can teach.
Yeah.
And so that's what resonates with me. So even all the learning I'm doing, even in psychology and everything, it's not to become a psychologist or have a PhD, all this kind of stuff. No, it's wanting to learn so I can take what I learn. And yeah, I think it helps me, but also giving to others as well, so
Yeah.
they can make a difference for themselves.
Same, honestly. And so I feel like this is a good spot that kind of leads us back to you talking about people having the importance of studying a diverse amount of things and really getting those experiences earlier in life so they can kind of see what they're good at, not getting too stuck in something that may not be for them. And so very clearly seems to be something that you've understood early on. And so that kind of leads us back to our conversation at the beginning is like, how did you learn this early on? Why did you experiment with so many different things? And, how did you gain that sort of insight at such an early time?
Curiosity.
You're just naturally
Period.
curious.
Being curious like crazy. Yeah. I always like when I see stuff, I wanted to learn different things, and I was curious about it, whether it was experimenting with the chemistry set, building a rocket, uh, in terms of those things, or wanting to understand people, wanting to understand hypnosis. One of my first hypnosis books was in junior high, which I still have, and I have like so many more since then. I just wanted to learn and study, and I have, gosh, I think I'm approaching like 13,000 physical books. So I read a
It's
lot.
insane. It's insane.
Yeah, I get books every week. Sometimes I'll pick up like in one day 10 books. And
Jeez.
because yeah, and I go through books, and a lot of stuff is in other books. I can skim through all that kind of stuff, and I have even PDF copies of probably around 300,000 PDF copies of books too. Yeah. But I like physical books. That's like my thing. I like learning, and I like knowing, and it seems like there's not enough time, and I look at like even my books, and I tell myself that, oh my goodness, I only know like this much, and I have all this kind of stuff. I said, boy, I'm like an ant in terms of that. Yeah, so there's just not enough time to learn everything, so I have to distill a lot of stuff, and they get focused as well, and then say no to a lot of the other things that are worthless to me. So I have to say yes to the growth part and the learning part and everything, and then specify what is I want to learn here and there and everything. So it's a continuing process.
So that leads me to another question real quick, because I saw on your resume that you had like an EEG certificate, right?
Correct.
You
Yep.
studied EEG.
Yeah, I
So,
studied at the EEG Institute, which is like one of the premier EEG training. So from some of the pioneers in EEG.
so this idea of like being more tapped into like theta waves for a person who is like either ADHD, or just like more of the daydreamy curiosity type person, that place of hypnosis will take you to. And so I feel like when I hear people talk about like being super curious, super daydreamy vision, I imagine their brain being a little bit further down there. And then that would, in my mind, explain the stuttering at least a little bit as well, where it's like there is some sort of disconnect between this beta brainwave of being engaged and critical and using the analytical mind. But as you learn to develop that, you ended up having a very, very well integrated brain. So I'm very interested in
Yeah.
having an integrated brain, because mine was almost backwards, where like I am super just like rational, analytical, and I had to kind of develop my true curiosity a little bit later in life. So I would say it wasn't until I was like 25 that I was really like allowing myself to experiment, as you say, to allowing myself to look into the things that gave me joy, that I was interested in, and building that sense of curiosity. So I'm curious, if you have any thoughts about like your specific brain and the idea of like even these Renaissance thinkers having these real integrated brains. This is part of what my book is about. So that's kind of what I'm bringing it up. It's like the idea of having a really well balanced brain between rational and imaginative, between intellect and imagination.
Yeah, so our brains, and I would even go so far to say our bodies are integrated if we understand it. So understand, like we talked early on, the feelings with our own body, and also the biological processes and so forth. And I think that takes both curiosity but also rational thinking. Both are very important. And in being curious and wanting to know, and even like you mentioned, the imagination part, imagining like what's happening, I think it's important to be able to use the logical side and being able to break down the components in terms of understanding as well. You know, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? So with me starting with being curious, then I'll go to logical. So I wanted to know, like, for example, I studied in a weekend, I wanted to look at Aikido. So Aikido is a Japanese martial arts, and it's been around for a little bit, not like some of the ancient arts like jujitsu and things like that. But Aikido, I looked at it by starting off with curiosity. How does Aikido really work? Then I had to go to logic. I broke it apart in terms of its own parts, and there's three wills that are key. So you have a small will, so like doing a twisting movement like this in order for a person, so like that. There's also a larger will like this, so when the person's coming at you, you can go and you turn like this, and they'll flip over. Then there's a wheel like this, like turning this kind of wheel, so you can use that and then spin a person around. So understanding those three wheels, you understand Aikido. Period. So you just work within those three wheels, and the same thing with a lot of other stuff, like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo and some others. You understand joint movements. So like right here, you have this joint here. So all you have to do is put like here and push it down here. You're going to be able to go. So you focus here at every angle here, here, like that. So you can take control of that. And so I look at in terms of logical how the body systems work and everything like that, put it together, how physics works. And so that's a logical side. But I had to be curious. I had to start off with curiosity. How does this work? I had to ask a lot of questions. And questions are very important for curiosity. So anything you want to know, start with questions. And then you can go deeper into that and understanding that. Maybe you have to read a lot of other things. I studied human physiology. I studied both classical physics, which we call Newtonian physics, and gravitational physics and quantum physics and all this kind of stuff. So just being curious in all those different areas just led me in terms of breaking down even martial arts techniques.
And so then you did the Marines, then you did LAPD, and then how did you kind of move into this coaching, public speaking role?
Yeah, I think I've always done something like that in terms of coaching. I like helping people and like teaching and all that kind of stuff, whether it was teaching women self-defense or even like when I had my businesses. I had an advertising marketing firm back in the 90s when I had a lot of employees, and to me, they were like there that I can teach them. I can coach them and everything like that. I didn't move into a professional coach, but I could still coach people and help them to develop and become their best. And I took a lot of that stuff. And then after I sold my business, I went back to school, got my master's in psychology, and also studied hypnosis at Hypnosis Motivation Institute, which is a year-long school in Tarzana. And then did Bobby Spade in Vegas and some other places. And then I met a guy named Thomas Leonard. So Thomas Leonard, he was a founder of Coach U and then also ICF, International Coach Federation. He passed away, gosh, has it been almost 20 years or something like that. So, but he passed away of a massive heart attack. Now, here's an interesting interesting guy. He came from the world of finance. And he was a certified financial planner that went into the coaching arena. He developed his own techniques and all this kind of stuff. But he was running ICF, which is like the foundational certification for coaches across the world. He started ICF and Coach U, which was like the very first official coaching organization, while living in an RV. And he traveled in his RV and did that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until he moved to Arizona with his partner and they bought a condo, he was ready to settle down. He ended up dying of a massive heart attack. And yeah, but still, he didn't allow living in an RV for him to start that major organization. And
that's crazy.
Yeah. So we could be wherever we're at and we think, well, we may not have this and that. But if you have an idea and you're curious about like wanting to make changes, go out there and test it out. See where it takes you. Listen to people, ask more questions, and become curious. And eventually, you can have a seed that boom, something that's going to change the world. Again, we talked earlier about uncertainty. Well, we don't know what's going to be happening in the future. But if you have an idea and you put it out there, that idea may have a ripple effect, like what Thomas did with International Coach Federation. People are going through that, and there's a lot of other coaching organizations that teach people how to get certified. They teach year long, but they started with this. Just like ChatGPT has created a lot of different businesses. So your idea may be the seed that launches a lot of other ideas, and you never know.
So let me ask you then, when you were doing your master's degree and doing a year-long hypnosis, which is definitely not easy, what was the idea you had at the time? Like, I know that you're curious. I know part of it is a curiosity, but I feel like the logical part had to also have something in mind with what you wanted to do with it. Did you plan on being Bobby Spade? Was that like the new career choice you wanted to take, or what was
No.
the motivation there?
Yeah, so I think Bobby Spade was more of an accident. It was like, okay, I didn't plan on that. My goal was to go out there and teach what I've learned. Being on stage was a natural offshoot of that. And I came across a friend, one of my friends who was a hypnotist, and he said, well, have you thought about doing stage hypnosis? I said, no, I hadn't thought about doing stage hypnosis. And he says, it's a great tool to draw people in, for you to teach people about hypnosis, but in a really fun way where you get to bring people up on stage. So I said, okay, let me give that a go. And that's how Bobby Spade was born. So it wasn't something I thought about, but it was something that all of a sudden happened from somebody else's like input of an idea.
I have one question then. As a former hypnotist, I know that there's a process behind choosing people in the audience as volunteers that are more suggestible. Will you enlighten us real quick on that?
Sure. Yeah. So as a stage hypnotist, we do certain tests and everything like that to make sure that like certain audience members, we want to see how people respond. So we do what's called suggestibility tests. Number one. Number two, and what a lot of people don't know is that as a stage hypnotist, I had somebody out there because I couldn't scan everybody. So they would go and they would look at people in terms of how they respond, and they would point them out. So those are people I would invite onto stage. And usually I would have more women and a few guys, but more women, only because it's weird, but a lot of guys will tend to follow the women in terms of like what they do. And I know that when people come up on stage, they want to be there. Because maybe they're had this subconscious thing of wanting to perform in some way or another. And I knew that. So once I invited those people on stage, I would do more tests and everything like that to make sure that they're really suggestible enough to keep them there. So I would have plenty of people. Then I would send everybody else back down. Then I would pick those few people and then continue that. And I would always start like with women, and people would look at that and they would follow. So you're studying sociology, including in social psychology. So people would look at other people in terms of what to do. So they would follow that. So I would find the most suggestible person and they would follow that along. And we see this in other areas as well. For example, in a lot of churches, like evangelical churches and things like that, you see people, the same kind of thing. The preacher would bring people up and they would do certain things. We in hypnosis, we call like a lot of what they do a shock induction. So we do like an example is in a church, they would put the hand down on like this right here. But this is after they watch somebody else to do it. Put the hand here, and you got the like the power of Christ on like this, and a person would stiffen up. So that's a shock induction. I did the same thing. I would do a shock induction, and a person would stiffen up and do that kind of stuff, and then I would do like hypnotic demonstrations and put a person across a chair and everything like that. But they already had in their mind that this was going to happen because they may have seen it in a past. People follow what other people do. This is an inside secret that there's a lot. We do it subconsciously all the time throughout the day. We watch other people and then we take cues from those other people in terms of what to do. And or just don't do anything. If we don't find cues, for example, in a crowd, we watch other people and other people watching other people, and we see some bad thing happen. But in a crowd, people don't take action because they're looking around, and they don't want to be the one to stand out. Until somebody stands out and takes action, that's a cue. Then other people will come in and take action. Same thing in stage hypnosis. Same thing in churches. Same thing throughout life. We look for cues from other people, and that's one of the secrets that I understood as a stage hypnotist, and I think we need to understand it in terms of life as well. We take cues from others, but you could be the one getting out there and setting the cue.
Exactly, and that's a big part of my studies as well, sociology, and having what I'm calling my book the self-regulated society, a society of coaches, managers, teachers, leaders that are able to set that example, are able to give those proper cues in many different regards. Like, how do you respond when someone argues with you? How do you respond when you're disrespected? How do you respond when things aren't going your way? Even my kid being 14 and a freshman in high school, it's like a teacher gets frustrated and they lash out. A teacher gets overwhelmed and they do this, but it's like those are not the proper things that they should be learning. And the teacher doesn't think about that as a part of the learning. It's like, well, I'm a math teacher and I'm teaching my kid math. It's like, well, you're also teaching your kid how to handle frustration. You're teaching your kid how to have respectful communications. You're teaching your kid all these different things as a teacher as well.
Correct. Yeah, and school is an interesting thing, especially regarding teachers and everything like that. And we, as a society, and we see this in business and so forth, called the Pygmalion effect. You probably heard about that.
I've heard of it. I can't remember what it is right now, I'll be honest, but I definitely it sounds familiar.
Yeah, so in a Pygmalion effect, and there's been movies, I think it was My Fair Lady, starring Audrey Hepburn. So basically, what it is expectations. So what we as a person believes about another person, we will subconsciously look at this person a certain way, whether they're a person that we see as a genius or we see them as less than. We will act towards that. And teachers do this on a subconscious basis if they don't understand this effect that they would have on a person. So there was a study, the Pygmalion, that was done back in the late 60s, and the researchers looked at teachers, and the teachers, so like a teacher was told that this group of kids are like high level geniuses. This group of kids are they're just not that good. So what the teachers were told, their expectations, and at the end of the semester, these high level kids, they got much better, and these other ones went lower. And it turns out that it was all made up. What the teachers were told and what they expected, basically they were part of the study. So what we expect of others, including that teacher, we will do things and lead them down a certain way. So we have to understand that about we expecting on our own selves, but also of others, whether we're a coach or teacher or anything like that. We have to expect higher of every single person because we will take those kind of actions towards that. So
Yeah, that even brings in the label, like the labeling theory, which is what we call it in sociology. Is like where we're creating labels for these people that are just not serving them in any sort of way. Just like your label of moron. I hate to even say
moron. Yep.
yeah, it's so silly. But yeah, it's like and that there's lots of different things that go along with that. There's lots of little micro actions, how much attention that kid is getting, the sort of subconscious facial expressions that they're perceiving from, that teacher. Is it a scowl or is it a smile? And things like that are all affecting that kid and that kid's development. And I just don't
Correct.
think that teachers necessarily think about it like that. And so they do try to find these labels. And then it becomes hard for a kid. Imagine you're a kid who, has not generally performed well, but you would like to change your stars, you'd like to turn things around, but now your teacher has always been treating you like this kid who's lesser than. That's a hard thing to break out of,
Yeah.
as well as the
Yeah.
label.
Yep. I can. And by the way, the term moron, because of my IQ, my very first IQ test was 70, and back then they didn't look at the outside circumstances that actually led to it, the stresses and everything like that. And what I didn't understand it till later on, and it wasn't until I was, I believe, 34 years old, I retook the IQ test and I scored a 156. So,
Mm.
so I went from being that moron to a genius level, and eventually, I was a member of Mensa, but it wasn't my thing. So,
Jeez. Yeah, that's crazy. So you've been working with clients most of this time, you said.
Mhm.
And so I guess kind of a hard question, kind of a big question, but obviously we deal with resistance in clients. In NLP,
Correct.
we have certain statements that help us get through resistance and things. I'm just kind of curious on a general level, what have been some of the things that you've learned over the time that have allowed you to overcome resistance with any sort of clients that you've worked with, people that are struggling to accomplish change?
Yeah, I think early on I would use a lot of data and stuff like that, and it turns out that it didn't work. It didn't resonate with them. So I shifted back and I started rereading Milton Erickson and some of the stuff that he did. I have a whole shelf full of Milton Erickson books.
Nice.
Milton Erickson was very
The
famous.
Wizard of the West.
Yes. So I
Yes.
started using metaphors and stories and everything to get into the person's subconscious mind. That helped to influence them to break through the resistance. And so once I realized that we as humans, data doesn't resonate with us, but the narrative does.
And by data, you mean like what to eat, how to work out,
How to
like
work out or yeah,
how many
according to
calories.
like the percentage of this and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, people don't resonate with that because it doesn't go into the brain. Now, having said that, if a person is if they're very intellectual and very logical, that tends to work with a lot of those people. But for the most part, stories work amazingly well. So stories that relate to the person. That's the reason I tell a lot of the people that go into coaching and otherwise have a number of different stories, but you want to have something that relates to that person that you're working with. So now they go into that. They have an understanding of where they need to shift. It gets into them on an emotional basis versus trying to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. That doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work at all. They'll shut down and they'll regress and they just won't listen. You need to open them up. And I found that using stories and metaphors and things like that always work because now you're breaking through that resistance. And I've done it with hypnosis clients. I learned a lot about resistance and especially with people that have a fear of hypnosis. So I had to educate them and what it was beforehand instead of going right into the hypnosis where they were resistant to educating them on what it really was. And I use stories and things like that. Just tell them that hypnosis is not sleep. It's more of focused concentration. So,
Yep.
and so I would tell them that if you're truly intelligent, and you're intelligent, right? I said, and using focused concentration, you'll be much better. So if you're an intelligent and focused person, you'll do really well.
because they're thinking if they're intelligent and focused, they're going to not be able to get hypnotized. And you're flipping it
Correct.
on them. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Like that pre-framing is incredibly important to that.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So I am curious about, you have this huge, huge resume, right? And so when you're, let's say, trying to get a client or telling someone what you do, trying to really like sell your services, how do you give some sort of elevator pitch that is not egotistical and listing out a giant list of things?
Yeah. So it so in terms of like me telling people like what I do, I always start like with a question. And my resume is not on my elevator pitch at all. My focus is on the person. And like anything like you mentioned being curious. So I would ask the person a question. That's and based on the answer on their question, as I get to know them, then I would bring in terms of what I do that can help them or help somebody else that they know. So I would ask them, for example, have you or anybody else had like this issue? And I would listen beforehand, listen, and they've already told me their issue. I think it's people that, for example, are mentalists. They're very observant. So observation, and if you as a coach, you can help that person by feeding back to them what their issue is. So if if you or somebody else that you know has this issue, and they don't know that they told me that, or I will look at their body language, then what I'll ask them that question. I said, then I would say, okay, here's my card, or just call me, or I have my QR code. Then I would lead them in terms of that specific issue. But again, I have to listen for that in terms of that.
No,
And
it's a really good answer, actually.
yeah, because I think a lot of people don't listen. They don't look at the person. They have a standard thing that they say to everybody, and I don't think that really works very well. And yeah,
I
we
find
have to
myself
listen.
I find myself, me and my wife call it mouth vomiting because it's not literal vomiting, but it's like you just open your mouth and some random stuff comes out because we do so many diverse things. My wife's got like 3 jobs and she studies a million different things and she's always educating herself like me. So when someone comes up to me like, "Oh, what do you do?" It's like it's always a different answer, you know. And so I've been like, we've both been in this place of like, I just like to feel better about how I respond to that question of like, what do I do when I have such a diverse, without being like, well, I'm working on a book and I'm doing this podcast and I'm doing this and I'm getting my master's degree, and then all of a sudden it's like someone's kind of overwhelmed and it sounds like I'm kind of just bragging on myself.
Yeah. Uh, Somebody asked me what I do, then I would basically go back to them and everything like that. I always like to try to make it about the other person because at the end, all this kind of stuff that I'm learning and all the certifications I've had and all the education I actually have 2 PhDs, one in clinical psychology and one in neuropsych. Studied neuroscience, had postdoc in neuroscience, and currently studying physics. So working towards my PhD in physics as well because I like to learn. I'm curious. But all this kind of learning and everything I've read and all this kind of stuff is meaningless to the person. All they care about is how I can help them. And the only way I can do that is to listen to them, have them give me their resume, their information, everything like that. If I can pull out what I've learned and all this kind of stuff that can help them, then that's what's important. It's not about me, it's about them. Period.
So would you say that I can say that I learned that the hard way. I can 100% attest to that. And I really resonated with what you were saying before with, people not resonating with the data and it actually being, in my opinion, more detrimental to be what's called the advice monster and giving people a bunch of advice, because ultimately, not only does it not resonate with them, so they don't really do it, but then they end up beating themselves up about not being able to do it. They feel
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, he gave me this personalized meal plan that was just for me. He spent his time on it and I can't even follow it. I'm not self-disciplined. And then all these labels, all this identity stuff around the fact that they couldn't follow the meal plan that I gave them. When in
Correct. Yep.
reality, it's like I never really actually connected with them and helped them find a why for it. I didn't even need to give them a meal plan. I could have just talked to them about what's their reason for this. And when I started asking questions as opposed to giving advice, my whole business changed, turned around and everything. And I was getting a lot better results with everyone. So I guess my question is, did you have to learn that the hard way? Did you have to kind of
Sure.
give people the data and you're like, why is this not working, and deal with the frustration? And then is that kind of what potentially led you to doing more schooling and more certifications and stuff, was understanding this stuff
Just
better?
yeah, well, learning about people, I think, is very important, and having like a lot of different knowledge. But I think a lot of people who are experts get caught up into the expert paradox, where what we learn and because it's commonplace around us, right? And because it's commonplace around us, we think it's everywhere. So we will spurt out stuff that for us is like, okay, this is like down here. For them, they have no idea. And yeah, so I had to backtrack off that. I had to go back to a beginner's mindset, especially when I'm dealing with people, and tell myself they don't know what I know. I don't know what they know. I have to ask questions to understand where they're at. I can't just throw stuff out. It doesn't work. And 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 I've told other experts the same way. I said, imagine yourself. You're now in the Amazon jungle, and you come across like a tribe of people there. They know what they know about what's going on there. You don't know what you don't know. You may even have a PhD, but you don't know what you don't know, and they try to show you all this kind of stuff, but it goes over your head because for them it's commonplace. For you, you're a beginner. You're an infant in a lot of cases in that environment. So they would have to teach you as if you were an infant again at that basic level for you to start learning of how to survive in that environment. Well, we as experts, we have to understand that the people we're dealing with, unless they have a lot of education in that arena, they don't know what you know. So we have to go back down here. The only way to do that is be curious enough to discover that person and where they're at and what they're dealing with and what they know. And then you can take your knowledge piece by piece at that beginner's level and just help them just enough, not this much, just enough that they can utilize that one piece of thing that will help them to move forward. Then you can add on to that, but you can't throw everything at them. And so I had to learn that way myself to back off with everything I know. People don't care about all this other stuff. All they care about is what I know that can help them specifically.
And how much you care. So asking those
Yep.
questions, but also show care as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that actually answers my other question that I was going to ask you too, because I'm curious about this place of feeling confident enough to work with people that you've not in fields in which you've not worked. So like a CEO, or a firefighter, first responder. I know you've been in the military, but for me, it'd be like military as well. These are people that I have no experience in their field, but yet I want to be like a peak performance consultant. And so I have to be able to show up in those fields and feel confident and not deal with imposter syndrome. And so I actually kind of think that you can chime in, but I feel like that may be a good method. Is like, okay, well, I don't need to try and prove myself. I need to try to get to know them and figure out a way that I can provide a solution to their problems, or a service, or be of value.
Yeah. I think people get caught up and we see this in industry. Like if you don't have experience in our field, we're not going to hire you. So you need experience, even though you may have experiences in other areas, but they want experience like you've worked in this industry and doing this kind of stuff. The problem with hiring those kind of people is they get caught up in the same mindset and they're unable to grow. We see like industries falling apart and the average major corporation dies after 25 years because they have been unable to change. It takes somebody coming outside with a different outlook or a different way of looking in order to make shifts. We think about like the story of Henry Ford, and typically automobiles back in the day were made one car at a time. They were handmade one car at a time, and And he looked outside of the automobile industry where they did the packing, the grocery like packing industries, where they had the lines where people would just pack all the way down through and came out with the final product all boxed up and everything like that. So he did the same thing with making automobiles. Prices dropped down. He shifted a whole industry. And in terms of like with you with peak performance, it's the same way. You have experiences in other arenas. And even in peak performance, we're all humans. So those experiences, that knowledge, everything you have can help other in other arenas. In a special forces arena, you don't have to have been in special forces, but you have knowledge that can help a special forces person in terms of their mindset and help them to grow. Those are usually people that are open and same thing working with CEOs. Uh, again, they're still humans, so they may be locked into one way of thinking, but you bring in a different perspective that can help them to going higher because they may be stuck at a plateau based on what they've already experienced, their knowledge and in their industry. But you bring in something that's going to take them here. That's going to be the breakthrough, which is very important. And then plus your own experiences in life and what you've gone through will count as well because you're unique and your uniqueness can help somebody to have major breakthroughs. So yeah, utilize that. And we have to realize those are kind of gifts that we possess as we continue to learn and so forth. And like with you, Todd, you have a lot of different perspectives and you're continuing that. And I don't have what you have. So you have a lot to teach, including in the area of peak performance.
I appreciate that. That's a very good insight, and I like the fact that you said they're all humans as well.
Correct.
So it's like that common place of like, okay, I may not understand what it is like to be a special forces officer, but I do understand how to be human. Like I have been
Yes.
studying the human experience and groups of humans and things like that with sociology and psychology and the mind, and so that is a big part of everything that I'm studying. So
Yep.
thank you for
Yep.
that.
You're welcome.
With us moving forward into not only needing to adapt faster than ever with the changing tides, we also have to be able to maintain some sort of autonomy with our thinking away from influence, away from addiction, away from dysregulation, away from distraction. And I'm curious what comes to mind amongst your many tools, for people to be able to maintain a sense of autonomy. And if they do have a mission, to be able to stay on track and to avoid all those things.
So you mentioned our why, and I think that needs to be put on the forefront and put it on a board somewhere, like have it written down right in front of you, and go back to that, have that understanding, and everything that you do, everything that you learn, every experience you engage in should be connected to that why, that personal mission, and so forth. And once you start gravitating away from that, and you have people pulling you here and there and there and there, it's important to have another. So you have your why, but there's also a key word I don't think a lot of people use, and that's the word no. So you have to learn to say no. You say yes to the things that connect with your why. You say no to everything else. People will pull you, pull you, pull you, pull you in different directions, and you may have some cultural issues or certain guilt, like, well, like so and so wants me to go do this and do this and do this. But you got to learn to say no. I can remember when I stopped drinking years ago, when I was with the LAPD, I stopped, and some of my friends, when I go out with them, and they would offer me beer, and I said nope, nope, I don't do that. And they said, oh, you teetotaler and all that kind of stuff. They would try to cut me down. I said I stuck with my guns. I knew where I wanted to be, and that wasn't that. I did not need those kind of things, and I knew better ways of raising my own self up. So I stopped doing that kind of stuff. I was not influenced. I said no, and to this day, I learn to say no more often, and I say yes to the things that connect me with where I want to move forward to. And yeah, so I don't go to parties, and I don't do this, and I don't all these other kind of things. So that's what's helped me.
So in terms of connecting to your why, we both done the NLP course, and last time we talked, I remember we even went through like a little exercise of imagining what your life would be like in, let's say, 3 years from now, and imagine, it's ideal. Like, imagine you've built a business to where you want it to be. Imagine that you have the podcast guest that you want to have on, that you're published in whatever journal you want to be published in, or magazine, or your book is on
Correct.
the shelf of what bookstores, and to really like let yourself go there. And I think that when you say you have to have that vision, you have to have that why, I think that at best, maybe somebody might have it written down, but not necessarily have visualized it and fully embodied it, can picture what it looks like. And it feels very real to them, very visceral. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about that process of visualization, because I know that visualization is important to you to make that vision more real. How do you make that vision more real?
Yeah. So what we want to be able to get to, so we want to make sure that we use all our senses. That's very important. Not just the visual part of it, but even with the visual, we want to be able to expand that out, and we look at what's called in NLP the submodalities of each one of these. But I'm just going to make it a little bit clearer and not use words like that. So on the visual part, I want to look at it like the way you look at right now in terms of your environment. You see, you see what you see. The colors make it three-dimensional all the way around you, as if you're in that experience. And then
Dark or bright?
yeah, dark or bright, things like that. And then the auditory, the same thing. And the kinesthetic, your physical body is you're actually in it. And even the smells and the tastes, you're actually in that environment 3 years from now. And you want to specify what is that date 3 years from now? What is it that you're actually doing? And where you at? Are you in your new home? Are you doing your work? What does that look like? What does that environment look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Is it maybe you smell like baked goods? You can smell. Maybe you just had a, a breakfast you haven't had before. Maybe you're in another country and you're vacationing, but you want to be at that specific date, that whole environment. Use all your senses to be involved in that environment. Now, there's another thing you need to look at as well, because that's never going to happen until you understand your current reality. Where are you at right now? Because if you don't understand the truth of where you're at now, this is not going to happen, because you may put your mind like, okay, my current reality, but you may lie to yourself. You need to be truthful with yourself, your current reality. Now, you see what's going to be happening in the future in your current reality. Now we're going to go back to the future, and you're going to backtrack. You're going to think about, okay, what did I do the week before in order to get to me to where I got to? And what did I do the week before? All the way back down to your current reality. So now, in essence, have a roadmap that you're going to now move forward on. So this is an action I have to take tomorrow or this afternoon from where you started. This is the next step I'm going to take. Next step, next step. Now, having said that, because of uncertainty, we don't know what's actually going to happen. Yet, if you have a roadmap, you can make adjustments. This is where you mentioned earlier about being flexible, being adaptable. So when something happens, we need to be flexible. But you're still moving forward towards making that happen. It may not be exactly the same, yet it may be better. But you have something to focus on terms of that. You're moving forward towards that thing, but you're doing it in each present moment. And again, we will come, like in each moment, we're going to come to different paths. We may have like this path, this path, this path. We make this decision, this decision, this decision, this decision. So we have to look at which decision is going to be the best. That's going to be focused on our why. We take that path. We take this path. We take this path. So it's not like a straight line, but it's going to be like this, like this, like this, all the way through till you eventually get there. And just realize that. And I enjoy that. I don't want things certain. I don't want things to be like boom, boom, boom. I want to go through these different challenges that eventually going to get me there. To me, that's fun. So
do you believe in the flip side also of really like allowing yourself to do some of the shadow work, which I guess would be like, okay, if I don't do this in 3 years, this is what I'm going to feel. I'm going to be disappointed in myself. I'm going to be in the same place I am now. Because I feel like a lot of sales scripts will take people through that, and NLP, personal breakthrough session or whatever, might take people through that. And so do you think that that's a necessary part of the process as well, is to truly allow yourself to feel what it would feel like if you don't accomplish this thing and
Sure,
you never accomplish this thing?
sure. I think if it's set up right at the beginning and really having a person in embracing that why, I think all that others, including the fear, will go away, especially if they stay on track. Because the truth is, your why could be what you're already involved in right now, what you're doing in a moment. So once you understand that what you're doing your why right now, you're going to have this goal you're going after. But if you do your why in a moment, I think that goes away. Now, having said that, yeah, I think if we take a person through that process and what if you get off track in terms of your why? Where would your life be? What would it be like? Imagine that part. That may force them to get back into that, staying on track with their why. And I like to tell people that we're all going to have like certain goals and objectives and outcomes and all this kind of stuff. But it's more important, like, yeah, you may not have the same outcome in 3 years, but if you're still on track with your why, even if it's a different outcome, what you're feeling is still going to be the same, as if your previous outcome and you have this outcome, as long as you stay true to your why all the way through. Because
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, because things change anyway. Uncertainty, we talked about that. Chaos theory talks about it as well. And Edward Lorenz, who created chaos theory and butterfly effect and all that kind of stuff, and he talked about that. So something on the outside may happen. We don't know. Like we may have our path, but something may affect that path and so forth. We
Like one little idea in a book.
like one little idea in a book, and it takes you, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
look at your own path. Look at all the things that affected you that led you to where you're at now, interviewing me on your podcast, and and then what's going to be happening in the future. All this kind of stuff. And you think back, going back to high school, would you have thought about like you would be doing something like where you're at now?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all.
Not at all.
I thought I was gonna be a personal trainer, strength coach, like yeah, in some sort of college gym or something.
Yeah, yeah. And here you are. And a year from now, you may be on some major stage you never know, and like somebody like Tony Robbins or something like that. You never
Yeah,
know.
I know. I know.
I met Tony
So
Robbins back in the early '80s, and I never expected him to become the Tony Robbins we see now.
yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely
Yeah.
insane. So my rational brain and can't help but think about what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on underneath the surface of like something when you say focus on your vision and make it very sensual, make it a whole sensual experience. Because I know to some person that's going to sound like the law of attraction. It's going to sound like, oh, if I imagine it enough, it'll come true. And there may be something to that, from all the books I've read. I think there may be something to that, and I can't deny it entirely. But what I see is this like rewiring of the nervous system.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
and so it's like when you're imagining this thing and you're making it a very sensual experience, then you're able to create a comfortability or a sense of certainty around that thing coming to you. Whereas if it's like me being a millionaire is something that's unfamiliar to me, I've never thought about being a millionaire. I've never been a millionaire. I'm confused, what it even means to be a millionaire. It's kind of daunting. If I've never really let myself imagine that, truly imagine what it's like, then when it comes, it's scary. And then when the opportunity even comes around, I may shy away from it because it's scary. And I may not even be conscious. It may be subconscious because my nervous system is overwhelmed. And like this $1 million idea that could pan out and could be amazing for me ends up being something that I'm avoiding. And so then on the flip side of really creating that pain response around the negative experience. So, in 3 years, I will feel discouraged and I'll feel annoyed that I never went after my dream. I'll feel sad. Those sorts of negative experiences then begin to rewire the nervous system to feel negatively for not doing the thing that you should be doing. And so I just wanted to make sure that we kind of like touched on that because I know that you're kind of into neuroscience and all this stuff. And so
So
I don't want to just leave it at like to create your vision or to make your vision more clear. We just make it very sensual into all the logical people are like, I like that's a challenge. For me, that's a challenge to even like really go inside and okay, what's it smell like? What's it taste like? What's it feel like? I'm very in my head. I'm like, and so to overcome that challenge, but also to understand the importance of making it a central experience for rewiring the nervous system.
correct.
I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me go a little bit further. So we'll start off, especially you mentioned neuroscience. So neurons that fire together wire together, and that's been said over many, many, many decades, and it's based in evidence on terms of how our how our brains work, including cognitive flexibility, neuroplasticity, and so forth. When we learn something new, our brains will start connecting those kind of things. So the actions we take and so forth, our brains will connect it. And the more times we do it, the stronger it gets. The less we do something, or when we stop doing something that we had already had a strong connection with, they start weakening because now we're focused on that kind of stuff. For example, I remember back in grade school, I had to memorize all the state capitals of every single state in the United States. You think I know it now? Heck no, I don't know it now because I'm not focused on that. That's not even a thing. Why would I want to know that? I mean, it's irrelevant. So what's irrelevant for me just doesn't exist anymore. Plus, I can Google it or something like that, or have
Yeah.
that kind of thing. That makes it easier. Yet, as we talked about before, in terms of like focusing on what we want, and then I backtrack all the way back to current reality. Part of your current reality, in order to gain experiences, you practice. Now you can practice in a mind. In martial arts, we do katas. We do a physical manifestation of actual things, but we can do what's called scripting. So we can script out what we want to do, and we practice that. For example, going back to grade school, we did fire drills, correct? And
Yep.
those fire drills, the more we did it, so when something actually happens, we would follow that out. We would do the same thing. And so we can take actions on something we want to focus on. And you mentioned money. So we can read something from maybe an expert on money, and especially becoming a millionaire. But what did they do? What were some of the actions that they took? So don't just read a book. Find something that you can do actionable within a book itself, and do it and take action on it. Practice it. Practice it. But you can script out on your mind. You can even practice it in your mind, because when we practice in our mind, it's the same thing. Our mind doesn't know the difference between something we actually done or something we imagined. So you imagine, but it's not just about thinking that you're going to be a millionaire. That doesn't work. But it's to practice in your own mind. What are the steps that I need to do on a regular basis? I can have you practice. If you've never done a fire drill before, I can have you imagine being in that environment and going through each step to get to where you need to be. Just imagining that kind of stuff. So that's kind of clarity that you have to have in your imagination. What are the physical things I'm actually doing? That's going to help me to wire my brain. So when the actual thing comes, it's going to be a lot easier. In the Marines, we did practice over and over and over again, especially like in recon and force recon, practicing towards a mission. We do the specific mission, but we would practice it over and over and over and over again, and then it became easier. Yeah, we had circumstances where we had to adapt or those kind of things because things change. Things don't always go according to plan. But the more you practice and looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, diversity, I think, helps a lot in terms of being able to make decisions. Remember, I said early on, all our decisions, everything we do is based on our past knowledge and past experiences, including what we practice as part of that. So it's going to be a lot easier when we move forward, because we're going to make the decisions, better decisions, especially when we have a lot of diversity in terms of what we studied and everything like that. Our decisions are going to be that much better moving forward. So we can make a decision now, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, based on the past. Our brain is wired that way. So you'll be able to move forward and be able to get what you want. But you cannot sit back and read something or take a course or take a class or even I think a really good coach helps you to put into practice and gives you homework and everything like that, and making so that you stay on track towards that you're wiring your brain in terms of that way. But just don't sit back and read something and think that you know what you know, and you don't know that. You only have the knowledge out of the book. You have to take that and put it in action, practice, 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 wire that brain, and then yeah, you'll be able to get to where you need to get to.
Mm, I love that. And I feel like I find myself, and so I'm curious your opinions on this, but I find myself seeing that need for a really strong why being very important for corporations as well as for entrepreneurs, as well as for even athletes and in organizations, sporting organizations. And so it's kind of funny, like being an expert in that, being able to take people through that, is something that can be very valuable that I don't know if people really understand how valuable that is, how everything kind of stems down from that values level.
Yeah,
You have any thoughts on that?
yeah. Uh, I think it goes back to really learning to understand them so they can understand, what are the values in terms of that. If they know their why, and I'm glad you mentioned values, because if your why doesn't match up with your own personal values, then what you find in terms of what you're helping with doesn't become valuable. And And so I think all that has to match up. Again, in initial like coaching sessions, do you do values solicitation at all?
No, I can't say I do. I didn't do the master prac, and that's when you're supposed to learn that. So I've studied it on my own. I'm pretty familiar with values elicitation, but I've never actually taken someone through it.
We'll talk about that off. But they
Okay,
basically
nice.
you just want to find out what is it that a person value the most. So there's typically we want to narrow down from a whole list of values and a lot of different things. Narrow down to your top five values, and and then you want to find their number one, what's called driver value. So that driver value usually doesn't change. It can, but usually doesn't change. This is what drives them. So you need to connect that with that why. And whatever they do, they're going to be utilizing that. So with your coaching program, once they know that and they value that based on their top value, and you're always going to be connecting that, they're going to be moving forward. So the lessons you give them, or the coach, or the not the lessons, but the actions that they're going to take is going to be based on that, in addition to their why, and they will find that valuable. So you can't like generalize with everybody, especially like with coaching. What works for one person is not going to work with somebody else. So it really goes back down to what we said at the beginning: know them. Once you know them and what you put them through is you connect that to them, they're going to want to move forward. Again, it's a subconscious thing, but you need to find what that why, what their values are, and even their own beliefs. While beliefs could be changed, because I've changed my beliefs quite a bit through the years. What I used to believe 20 years ago has shifted to today as I gain new knowledge, new experiences, and so forth.
How it
And
should be.
yeah, so I'm not the same person. In fact, by the way, I'm not the same person now as I was when we first started this interview. I'm a
Yeah,
whole different person.
that's crazy. So
Yep.
there's a guy named Richard Barrett. I don't know if you've heard of him. He like consults with organizations and he's even consulted with countries, and he has this like whole model built around like Eastern philosophies and like consciousness as well as cultural values. And so what he does is he goes into a place and he figures out what are the current values that you're seeing. So he goes and talks to the employees. What are the current values that you're seeing in the corporation? Then he asks them, what are the current values you'd like to see in the corporation? And then the manager goes to the manager, owner, leader, whoever, and goes, what sorts of values would you like to see in your business? What would you really like to represent your business? And then the amount of difference between those values is cultural entropy. And so it's like the further out of line those values are, the more problems you have in your corporation. And so the idea is to figure out ways in which you can kind of line those values up. And so I feel like that gap is kind of what most people are experiencing on a micro level with themselves. It's like, okay, well, what sort of values do you believe in? What sort of values would you like to see in the world? What sort of values are you living? What sort of values are being rewarded in the world as well right now? and how much difference is between those is how much dysregulation, dysfunction, and things that we're experiencing in our own life.
Yeah, going back to the organization. So, in terms of values, depending on how the organization is structured, because a lot of companies, especially larger companies, they have a top-down management style. And then you have like startups that have a bottom-up management style, and a top-down is more dictatorial style. The bottom-up is now you have everybody embracing the values and the missions. Everything is from here. The employees on a line, and and in society, we're also affected, whether it's culturally in others, whether it's a top down or bottom up. So bottom up is going back to our core self. And a lot of people don't know who they are. Remember, Socrates says, know thyself. A lot of people don't know who they are. Their whole self is taken from other people, whether, again, it's their culture, whether it's their educational system, family members, and so forth. Then we're given, going back to talking about identity, people will have their labels as who they are, but it's not who they are. That's just a label. And a label could be their profession. So a lot of people, when you ask them, who are you? They may say, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, and all this kind of stuff. No, that's just a label. That's not who you are. It's so we need to go back to know thyself. And based on know thyself, we discover our why. But that's very difficult because people may be scared of finding out who they really are. And it could be, like you mentioned earlier, that shadow self too.
Do you have any tips for someone who feels like maybe they're not in the line of work, but they don't know what their line of work could be? You know, they're really struggling with that and they don't know themselves.
Yeah, I would tell people or ask of them, what is it that when you were like really young, what is it that resonated with you? What is it that when you think about it, like I did with Barry, that where he finally discovered that DJ self and everything else, which it was always there, or the psychiatrist who her actress self. I think a lot of people will tend to tamp that down, and even like with me, I had to do that as well, and it could be that shadow side. So we need to integrate, as Carl Jung talks about the shadow self. We need to maybe integrate that shadow in terms of discovering our whole self too, so we could discover who we are. And the shadow self is that side that we don't want other people to know. So we walk around wearing a mask all the time, what we hide from the world. So we want the world to see this part. And eventually we come to believe that this mask is us. And I dealt with that myself. In terms of running an international martial arts organization, I wanted to have people look at me as this really tough, hardcore guy, and not the guy who plays with puppets and does ventriloquism or does all these other kind of things. That is the opposite of that. Not the person who loves art and so forth. Not the person who just enjoys, even something acting silly or whatever, even going in a store and playing with kids and everything like that, or things like that. So I put on this persona. And so once I uncovered that and exposed the person who was maybe more caring and things like that, now I always had a parts of that, but that was as a protector. So protector was stronger in my mind. But the truth is, that shadow self, and the shadow self is not somebody who is like mean or anything like that. It could be somebody who's caring that you didn't want to expose that. So whatever that is, you need to bring that out and integrate it. Now, if you have a lot of emotional mental issues, then you need to build strong into yourself before you start going and doing shadow work or something, because it can make things worse, especially when you see that side of you that you didn't want. But we expose that all the time inadvertently. We'll judge other people, but it's truly we're judging our shadow self and so forth. So
would you say there's a breakthrough that you had that allowed you to kind of have that freedom mentally to really just allow yourself to be the quote unquote weirdo or the diverse person who, both experienced caring as well as, being a hard ass? How did you come to allow yourself to be that person?
I realized, and I think it goes back to curiosity and studying and reading a lot in order to. And again, I studied a lot of shadow work and everything, and so I think it was curiosity that allowed me to bring that out more than anything else. Again, I'm curious by nature anyway, and curious about myself was very important. And was this like the superficial self that I wanted the world to see, or was there something deeper? So once I did that and I went down and just exposed that and let it out, oh my gosh, it just got to be really, I think, interesting at first and then exciting second. That I got to bring something out that I think helped me quite a bit. And I
That
don't
is.
like worry about making mistakes or whatever because I know that as humans we're all going to make mistakes, and even when I'm speaking on stage, yeah, if I make a mistake, I make a mistake, but I don't allow that to stop me. If I can act silly around people and just like a little kid, you see a toddler running around and they're doing stuff and everything. They don't really care. They don't care about any of that kind of stuff. They'll go out in the middle of public and maybe sing, and parents try to stop and everything like that. So, in essence, that was me coming out, being like that again, and just expressing myself. I get to act silly. I'm allowed to act silly. Other people, adults, may see that initially, but the truth is, on a subconscious basis, those adults want to be like that again. Those adults want to be a kid again, but they fear it. They fear what other people may think about them. And yes, we think in terms of more rational ways as an adult than we did as a kid. We're not going to jump in front of a car and doing those kind of things and so forth. We understand that, but we also tamp down that curious side. We tamp down that expressive side. We tamp down that creative side, and we tamp down the shadow side. So we need to allow that to come out and express once again.
Mm. That's powerful. And I have to touch on something you said that was really important to me because you said it stems back to curiosity, and I was curious where you're going to go with that.
Oh,
And
sure, I got it.
and
Yeah.
so I was no, and so that was a very good answer though. Like you said you were curious about if you had more to offer. I don't know those are your exact words, but it was something around the back. Yeah, you're curious. Is this it, or do I have more to offer? Is there more of me? Is there a deeper level of myself that I have not uncovered and really brought to the world? And to me, like that is one of the most solid, best forms of curiosity that someone could have. Is
Hmm.
like, is there more that I can give? Is there more
Well
that I can
said.
do? Is there more to me? You know? And
Hmm.
so like, I'm glad that was your answer around like, how do you find that freedom of really just being yourself? And it's like, well, I have to sit down and ask myself, like, is there more to me that I'm just not really showing, and to allow myself to be curious about that,
Well,
and then I'm always.
yeah, think about creativity because without curiosity, you can't be creative. And you look at a 5-year-old, and among 5-year-olds, 95% are creative. By the time we become adults, only 5% of the population is creative and really curious. They don't challenge. Basically 95% does not challenge the status quo. They go along with the flow instead of looking different ways. Only that 5%, but those 5% are the ones that like Stephen Jobs and others. They're the 5%. And so we need to break out of that and go back to the 5-year-old self. And have you heard
Yes.
of the spaghetti and marshmallow test?
I've heard of the marshmallow one, not the spaghetti.
Yeah, so the spaghetti and marshmallow test. So basically, they take different groups of people, and for example, like CEOs and engineers and MBAs and other groups, and they put them where they have 20 sticks of spaghetti, and they have a tape, I believe it's a foot long piece of tape, and a marshmallow. So they have to build a structure with the marshmallow on top, and the highest structure wins. And so they had different groups, including a group of people who just graduated from kindergarten. And so the ones that build the shortest structure were people who graduated with their MBA. And CEOs, they did a little bit better than that, but they also had help from some other people. And engineers, because they understood engineering, they did pretty good. But the ones that consistently had the highest ones were the 5-year-olds. Now, here's the reason why. The MBA had the smallest ones because they they tend to follow like everything was like a step by step process. This is the way you do stuff. You follow along, and that's the way they were thinking. They had to follow this certain kind of ways. The 5-year-olds were curious experimenters. They would do something and would fall apart. They would do something. Now I think they had like 20 minutes to do it, something like that. But they would do it over and over again till they succeeded and had the tallest and most unique creative structures on top of that.
Jeez.
Yeah,
I've seen something about genius being trained out of people and how most kids are considered a genius level. I'm not sure who did that study, but I've definitely seen that somewhere, and that's been very intriguing to me along the lines with what I was mentioning before with the brain waves. With someone being able to tap into like a theta brainwave from a waking state, because as
mm-hmm.
we grow older, most people are unable to tap into that brainwave without falling asleep, without being very drowsy. Unable to really focus on a single task. And I
Correct.
believe that,
Yeah.
like the polyphasic sleep cycles that like Da Vinci and Tesla and these guys used to have were perhaps allowing them to maintain that sense of sleepiness while still being active and focused on a task, which is allowing them to act from that theta brainwave.
Mm-hmm.
See what I'm saying? So I feel like a lot of people struggle to maintain that ability. So there's a guy named Vishen Lakhiani who owns something called Mind Valley, and he uses
Yes,
this term
Vishen.
called
Yes.
he uses this term called polyphasic. He says most of us are not polyphasic anymore, and Stephen Kotler talks about this too, the Flow Genome Project. Whereas once we basically evolve out of the theta brainwave, we evolve into alpha and beta brainwaves. We don't ever really allow ourselves to go back into theta unless we're sleeping. And so I think that these people are able to really do that, and I think that the kids are naturally in that place of theta, and so it's just like really creative, pulling from the ether and not judging themselves, not thinking about all the consequences if they lose. I'm sure some of the CEOs or MBAs are like, this would be embarrassing to lose to 5-year-olds because I'm an MBA. And so it's like all of that tension and all that stuff that they're accumulating along with the attempt to try to win is just like so silly compared to
Correct.
the 5-year-old just playing and having fun and
Playing and
experimenting.
having fun. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I like hanging around and learning from younger kids and younger adults and Gen Zs and so forth. Years ago, I interviewed this one girl on my podcast, and now she came from like her parents are both originally from India, and she lives up in the Bay Area, and she created this board game called Coder Bunnies. So it's a board game on teaching how to computer code from basic to advanced levels. And
Jeez.
yeah, so she amazing gal. And so the year before I interviewed her, she was recognized by then President Obama. She was also recognized by the city of San Francisco, and she was a keynote speaker at the Women in Tech conference. And since then, her company, Coder Bunnies, has become a multi-million-dollar company. Her second company is multi-million-dollar. She teaches young entrepreneurs and everything like that. She's been in Vogue. She's been in Time magazine. She's an international keynote speaker and so forth. Now, here's the interesting thing, which is really cool. When I interviewed her, she just turned 9 years old. She started prototyping her board game at 6.
Oh my God.
Yes, she's now in high school. She's 16 years old.
She's multimillionaire.
Multimillionaire. She hired a mother who has an MBA to be her business advisor. And
Gosh.
she was curious. I spoke to her father because I wanted to know about her parents, and her father said they just allowed her to be curious. They didn't try to drum anything out. Whatever she wanted to do, she wanted to do. She was curious about how a website was built. So her father showed her how a website's built, the underlying code and everything like that. She was curious about the codes. She was curious about all this kind of stuff, and she was curious how can she take all that kind of stuff and do it in a fun way to teach computer coding, and that's what she did. And created
Man.
Coder Bunnies, and she created the second one, and now teaches young entrepreneurs. Which she has a lot of top experts even well-known people who are in her events as which she brought in for them to help educate as well. But she did all this kind of stuff when she was a kid. So, yeah, people like her I learned from. So she was doing this early on. She had that kind of curious nature stemming back. She was that kindergartner that continued throughout her whole life. Well, her short life so far, she's only 16, but to this day, still being curious, still allowing herself to express the best parts and everything
Do you,
else.
do you think that that curiosity is like human nature? I mean, I feel like maybe
Sure.
some people are curious, more curious than others, but I mean, I can't help but wonder what sort of amazing world we could live in if we had environments. This is why I'm studying sociology, in which curiosity was cultivated.
Correct. And that's what we need. And also going through a diversity of different experiences because that will help. Boom, boom, boom. So I think a curious person will also want to learn different areas. Story Musgrave. So Story was a guy when he was 12 years old. I'm not sure which state. I think it was may have been New Jersey, but back a long time ago when he was a kid, he lived on a farm where they grew hay and they had hail baling machines and everything like that. And he was the kid at 12 years old. He had a they had to do the hand tying as the machines are going through to hand tie the wires for the bells, but he had to be really fast, and so that was one thing that he learned how to do really, really, really good. And so later he graduated from high school and he went into the Marines like me, and he wanted to be a pilot, but they weren't going to allow him to be a pilot because he needed a college degree and all this kind of stuff.
Mm.
And so he went into becoming an aviation mechanic, and he used a lot of what he learned in terms of aviation. He was very curious and working with his hands and all this kind of stuff. And he still wanted to be a pilot, so he ended up getting out of the Marines. He went to college and he got his degree in aerospace engineering. So he was doing that,
Jeez.
and yeah, so he did that, and so he still wanted to be a pilot, but this is the early days, like when NASA started, and so he applied for that, but he was rejected to NASA because they wanted back then, they wanted test pilots, and so he was rejected for becoming an astronaut. His degree meant nothing.
Oh my
So
gosh.
he ended up still he got his pilot's license as a private pilot. So he did that. Then he went back to school. He went to medical school, and because he was curious
Jeez.
about that. Yeah, so he ended up going to medical school and he studied medicine, became a cardio surgeon. And so he perfected a technique of using sutures. Remember going back to baling of the hail and how you tie it really fast and everything like that?
Oh
He took
yeah.
that same technique and he used it to repair hearts, all the aspects around the heart. And that same technique's used to this day. And so he developed it from something he learned earlier. Now, NASA was changing at this time, and they were looking for people in other arenas. So they were going to send people to the moon. They needed the moon suit developed. So they approached him, knowing his background, everything like that. And they said, Dr. Musgrave, we need your help. And you have both medical and also your engineering background. We need help to develop the moon suit that was used for the Apollo missions. Then they had this thing called Skylab, which he became involved in, which is precursor to the actual space stations. One of our early ones was sent out there, and he helped to develop the Skylab, and then later helped on the work with the space shuttle in terms of what's going to be used. Now, he still wanted to be an astronaut. Well, he got his chance with space shuttle because they needed his expertise. So he finally got to go out in space on a space shuttle. He
Dang.
did 5 shuttle missions. 5.
That's
You
crazy
remember the
after
Hubble
all that
space?
stuff.
You remember the Hubble Space Telescope that needed to be
Yeah.
fixed?
I
He
can't say
was
I
the,
remember that now.
yeah. So it was out of focus. So he did a spacewalk to repair the Hubble Space Telescope to bring it back into focus. So
Jeez.
so he did medicine on that. Then coming back down, he had his surgery for heart patient, after that. So,
That is insane.
and now he lives in Florida. He's doing other things, other creative areas, and in terms of organics and all this kind of stuff. A whole nother thing. He's in his 80s now. Well, almost 90 years old. Yeah, and he's still working. He's still curious and still being a kid.
See, that's the kind of people that I want to develop. That's the kind of people that I just think that there's so many more out there than
Correct.
have been able to come to fruition that have really, there's just a lot of value out there that can be brought to the world if we had more people like that. And I don't think
Correct.
it's like we need to wait around for those people to show up. Like I think they're here. I think they're everywhere. I think we just need to develop into those people, you know? And so we have to allow people to experience and express
Correct.
themselves in a variety of ways. And so yeah, I think that's huge moving forward. And I think that's something big that the dominating tyrannical leadership that some people express is just will never get people to perform in the same way as just allowing people to be themselves.
The dictator, maybe they need, like, in a short term decision making when there's a crisis going on. Yeah, so sometimes that needs to be done. Over the long term, no, that does not work. You do not want to squash people's ability to be creative, to express themselves, to be curious all the time.
Yep. That's so important. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm curious about. So we've touched on a lot of things, but when it comes to moving forward and evolving potential and really being prepared for the world that we're dealing with in the future, being able to adapt and being resilient and things, I think that having a vision is huge. And that stems back to really knowing what it is that brings you joy, that you're passionate about, that it lights you up. And that comes from having a diverse amount of experiences. And so is there anything else that comes to mind when it comes to really just like preparing ourselves to be adaptable, to be resilient in the future?
Yeah, I think a couple of what you just hit on, the diversity, and know that you don't know everything, and always go back to a beginner's mindset in terms of learning. And yeah, you have a lot of experiences and a lot of different arenas, and you're probably very good in that. Yet you're not going to be able to learn until you're curious enough to learn something new. That's a beginner's mindset. Always learn something new on a regular basis.
I love that. That's amazing advice. And that's actually where, I don't know if you've ever read the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Yes,
Yeah,
I met Michael years ago. Yep.
Yeah, nice. I love that. I didn't expect to see that in his book. You know what I mean? It's like there's all these different advices he has. It's for entrepreneurs. You'd think it'd be very like, business minded. And so he's like talking about go back to the beginner's mind. And I'm like, that is amazing advice, truly. And not only so much so of like being open minded and being humble, but really being curious. I think like we said and a lot. So yeah, I'm incredibly grateful that you joined me. Honestly, like I'm really curious to see where your experiences take you over the next, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You said your uncle or whoever lived to 107. So
109. Yeah.
You got quite a few years in front of you still, I'm sure, the way that you're keeping yourself healthy. So 2, 3, 4, 5 more PhDs. I guess we'll see.
I'll see where it goes. I mean,
yeah.
It's just continuing learning on my part and continuing experiencing and meeting amazing people like you. I mean, that's like it. Great from our heart.
Yeah, same. Is there any sort of mission that you have now moving forward? Any sort of big vision that you're kind of working on, something you're building? Because I didn't really necessarily ask you about the Integrated Mind Institute or Mind Hack Academy. Is there any other stuff that you want to kind of share on real quick?
Well, just really quick. My thing is that we think about that analogy. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for days. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for life. If you teach him how to teach others how to fish, then you can feed the whole world. And that's kind of where I'm at. I want to be a teacher so people can go out and teach, and that will make the difference. That's kind of like that ripple effect.
I like it. The coach's coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I love that idea. Okay. And then last thing, I guess, where can they find you if they want to follow your stuff, if they're interested in what you have to say, if they want to know more about you, if they want to work with you?
Yeah. So you can go to my website, bobchoat.com, and then I'm on social media. Probably the best place, just connect with me on LinkedIn, and yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I have to thank you tremendously. I didn't share this necessarily, but we've talked before, and our talk last time was nearly this long as well, and just wisdom packed. And we went through a couple exercises, and I've just always had a great time with you. Always a wealth of knowledge and an incredibly impactful human being. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for showing up on the podcast, and we'll definitely keep in touch and continue to see where our paths take us.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you as well.